Why the differences? This is the most important part of our discussion. All right, it's not really just about trash, but the reasons behind the differences in trash and why this is a much more complex issue for us to think about. We're going to start by taking a look at the stages of demographic transition. So countries, populations of countries that are in phase one have both high birth rates and death rates, so they might not experience much growth in the size of the population. As you move from the left to the right on this graph, the birth rates at first remain high while the death rates drop. So in phase two, you've got exponential population growth. And as you move to phase three, the birth rates drop down as a society, as a culture becomes more industrialized or modernized. So on the left side, you've got your developing countries, and on the right side, you've got your developed countries or industrial nations. This is important because when birth rates and death rates drop, the populations become more stable. When populations become more stable, this leads to better education, this leads to the empowerment of women, and this leads to more wealth, a higher standard of living. Higher standards of living lead to greater rates of consumption, which of course relates to more trash. But higher standards of living also relate to other things that we're going to talk about in a second. So when we look at the stages of demographic transition, where does the United States fall? Okay, the United States is in phase four, sometimes referred to as stage four. We're a modernized or industrialized nation, a developed nation in the country or in the world. This leads us to our seventh trash trivia question. What stage of demographic transition is India currently in? Just take a quick guess. You have your answer? Okay. India is in stage two of demographic transition because while their death rate has dropped off, their birth rate is still rather high. However, India's probably in late stage two or phase two and early stage three because their population is becoming more stable. Senegal and India are also in phase two, and as we'll see in a second, their populations are still rapidly growing. This diagram is taken from the National Geographic's 7 Billion series about human population from the fall of 2011. And as you can see, in 1960, right, each country is represented, it's the size of the country on the map is represented by its population size. 50 years later, right, the United States population is in the second to lowest growth category. So we're very stable as far as our population growth goes, with only 50 to 100% change in our size of our population. India is almost twice that, right? Anywhere from in the range of 133 to 199. So India's population has grown much more rapidly during this time period, and Costa Rica even more so. Costa Rica is in the second highest rate of population growth, and Senegal is in the very top category, the red category, over 300% growth in their size of the population. Again, this relates to demographic transition, and we'll talk about the Millennium Development Goals and how this relates to this in just a minute as well. First, let's take a closer look at consumption, which has to do with a country's gross domestic product, all right? How much money a country has per capita or per person. So again, this is a cartogram, so you can see by the relative size of the countries represented on this map how much wealth there is per capita. And if we look 30 years later, in this case to 2009, we can see that the United States is in the highest category, all right, of gross domestic product or amount of wealth per person, right, at over $40,000 per person. The next highest in Costa Rica, I'm sorry, we skipped the orange, we go to the yellow category. Costa Rica, the average citizen is about half of that amount when you look at total wealth in the country. And in Senegal and India, they're in the lowest category. They're among the poorest countries in the world when you look at the amount of wealth of the country per person. Now, of course, there are some wealthy citizens in India or Senegal, but as the entire population goes, there's quite an extensive level of poverty. Why does wealth matter? Let's take a look at this next image. What do you think this means? What is this cartoonist trying to say? If you said something about ecological footprint, you are correct, right? The countries that have more wealth leave a larger negative impact on the environment, all right? We use up more natural resources, we of course produce more trash, and we also produce more pollution. So wealth is directly correlated to the generation of trash. The more money a country has, the more money an individual has, the more we pollute and the more we generate trash. Unfortunately, this is somewhat of a positive feedback loop, or it spirals out of control. So money generates more consumerism and purchasing of more products, and this generates more trash. And because in the United States we're a wealthy country, we have enough money to deal with this trash. We incinerate it. We find more and more ways, and expensive ways, of dealing with trash. So we don't think it's a problem, okay? Because it goes away. We don't see it. So the wealthier countries have the luxury of making trash go away, which makes us consume more, because to us it's not a problem. This leads us to take a closer look at the Millennium Development Goals. The United Nations has organized these Millennium Development Goals. Here are the 8 goals, and actually each of them has several subparts. So I think there's a total of over 35 goals. But when you take a look at these goals, environmental sustainability is all the way at the bottom. Okay, this means the countries that have more wealth, that have more money, have the luxury of dealing with environmental problems, whereas the poorer countries, the countries that are in phase 1 or phase 2 of demographic transition, they first have to deal with poverty and hunger and basic medical care and infant child mortality rates and treating disease. So dealing with environmental problems, dealing with trash in particular for this discussion, is really a luxury of the wealthy countries. We're going to be talking more about these Millennium Development Goals later in our global education program, but this gives you just a little bit more insight of what a luxury it is to deal with trash.